For nearly 2 decades, Barron Trump existed in a strange kind of limbo, visible enough to be photographed at major events, tall enough to be impossible to miss, and yet somehow completely invisible when it came to anything that actually mattered. No interviews. No social media presence. No public statements. Just a towering young man walking quietly through one of the most chaotic political dynasties in modern American history. While his father reshaped the political landscape and his mother became one of the most scrutinized first ladies in living memory, Barron simply disappeared into the background. And for years, that silence spoke louder than any press conference ever could. But something has shifted. As Barron William Trump crosses the threshold of adulthood at 18 years old, fragments of the real story are finally beginning to emerge, through people who know him, through rare glimpses at public events, and through his own carefully chosen actions. What's coming into focus is a portrait that surprises almost everyone who assumed they already knew who he was. The assumptions were understandable. Grow up as the son of a billionaire president, attend elite private schools, live in a gilded penthouse overlooking Fifth Avenue, and surely the result is either a carbon copy of your father or a quiet rebel pushing against everything the family name represents. But Barron, it turns out, is neither of those things. He is something far more interesting, and far more deliberate. The story really begins not in a boardroom or a campaign rally, but in a Manhattan penthouse that most people will never see the inside of. Barron was born on March 20, 2006, arriving into a world of extraordinary privilege that could have easily swallowed him whole. The Trump Tower penthouse where he spent his earliest years was not simply a luxury apartment, it was an entirely different universe. White marble fireplaces, gold leaf ceilings, custom furnishings, and reportedly an entire floor that functioned as his personal domain. By any external measure, it was the kind of childhood that belongs in a film, not real life. And yet, the person most responsible for shaping Barron during those years was determined to make sure that the marble and the gold didn't define him. Melania Trump made a decision early on that surprised many people in her social circle. She chose not to employ a nanny. In a world where household staff outnumber family members and schedules are managed by assistants, Melania insisted on being the primary presence in her son's daily life. She has spoken about this directly, explaining that she wanted to be the one who was there when he woke up, there when he came home, and there at the end of every day. That commitment, sustained across years and across multiple homes spanning New York, Washington, D.C., and Florida, created something that money genuinely cannot purchase, a grounded sense of self in a child who had every reason to be completely untethered from reality. That foundation becomes even more remarkable when you consider what Barron was surrounded by. His father was not merely wealthy. Donald Trump was a cultural phenomenon long before he entered politics. The Trump name carried weight that most children couldn't begin to process. And yet, by multiple accounts from former classmates and people who encountered Barron during his school years, he carried that name without weaponizing it. Former peers have described him in consistent terms: polite, kind, surprisingly normal. One former classmate, speaking through social media years after their time together, described him simply as the best person she knew during those years, recalling with genuine warmth how he once arranged for roughly 80 of his classmates to visit the White House when his father was president. Not to show off. Not to leverage the access. Simply because he wanted to share something extraordinary with people he cared about. The multilingual dimension of Barron's upbringing is one of the most underappreciated aspects of who he is. While most children of privilege are funneled into French or Mandarin lessons as status symbols, Barron's linguistic education was something far more personal. Melania, who is originally from Slovenia, made a deliberate choice to raise her son bilingual from birth, teaching him Slovenian alongside English so that he could communicate directly with his maternal grandparents. By 2009, reports confirmed that Barron was also learning French, making him trilingual before he was even a teenager. According to reporting by journalist Mary Jordan, author of an extensively researched biography focused on Melania Trump, Slovenian became the private language of the family's inner circle. During the White House years, Melania, Barron, and her parents would hold conversations in Slovenian, discussions that even the Secret Service agent stationed nearby couldn't follow. Donald Trump, by various accounts, found this mildly frustrating, not out of any real concern but simply because he was on the outside of something he couldn't decode. That image, Barron sitting with his grandmother, speaking a language his father couldn't understand, existing in a world that existed independently of the Trump brand, captures something essential about who he is. He has always had a private interior life that the public persona of his family could never fully reach. That private interior life became his armor during what were, by any measure, extraordinarily difficult years. When Donald Trump became the 45th President of the United States in January 2017, Barron was 10 years old. 10. The age when most children are worried about Little League tryouts and homework assignments, Barron was suddenly living under a level of scrutiny that would have destabilized most adults. His every public appearance was dissected. His body language at inaugural events was analyzed frame by frame. Strangers on the internet made him the subject of speculation, commentary, and in some deeply troubling cases, outright cruelty. Melania Trump responded to several of the most egregious incidents publicly, something she rarely did, which illustrated just how seriously she took the protection of her son's dignity. The schooling choices that followed the move to Washington revealed how carefully Barron's well-being was being managed. While tradition and precedent pointed clearly towards Sidwell Friends School, the institution that had educated presidential children for generations, Melania chose differently. Barron enrolled at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Potomac, Maryland, a decision that was attributed almost entirely to her read of what her son actually needed rather than what looked appropriate on paper. It was a smaller, more intimate environment, and by accounts from those familiar with the school community, it worked. Barron settled in, formed connections, and continued to be described by those around him in terms that had nothing to do with his last name. The transition back to Florida, when it came, brought Oxbridge Academy into his life, a private college preparatory school in West Palm Beach that sat just 15 minutes from Mar-a-Lago. The school was, according to those familiar with Melania's decision-making, essentially everything she had been looking for: academically serious, genuinely diverse, structured without being suffocating, and capable of handling the logistical realities of educating the son of a former president. Security protocols were established discreetly, with school leadership working directly alongside the Secret Service to ensure that Barron's presence didn't transform the campus into something resembling a security checkpoint. Parents were briefed. Procedures were established. And Barron, from all accounts, simply went to school. It was at Oxbridge, and in the broader Palm Beach environment, that another dimension of who Barron was becoming started to crystallize. The athletic dimension. Golf had been part of his life for as long as anyone could remember. Donald Trump's devotion to the game is well documented, and the weekend rounds at various Trump-branded courses became genuine bonding time between father and son. People close to the family described Barron as a legitimately capable golfer, not just a kid going through the motions to please his father, but someone who approached the game with real focus and real ability. But golf wasn't the full picture. Barron's passion for soccer turned out to be deep and authentic in a way that surprised people who expected him to simply mirror his father's interests. During the Washington years, he played with D.C. United's Youth Academy, competing at a level that required actual commitment and skill. In 2017, he was selected for D.C. United's Development Academy U-12 squad, a detail that tends to get lost in the larger narrative of his life, but which says something significant about who he was choosing to be. He wasn't a kid using connections to collect impressive-sounding affiliations. He was competing, training, and being evaluated on his actual ability. He continued playing in competitive leagues in Florida in the years that followed, and the athleticism that drove that performance became increasingly visible in his public appearances. And then there is the matter of his height, which has become something of a cultural phenomenon in its own right. Barron Trump stands at approximately 6 feet 7 inches, a measurement that places him not only above his father, who stands around 6 feet 3, but above virtually everyone in any room he enters. The nickname the family reportedly uses among themselves, the Tall Trump, captures the gentle absurdity of the situation. Within a family where physical presence has always carried a certain significance, Barron somehow managed to outpresence all of them simply by continuing to grow. His father has, on multiple public occasions, suggested that the official measurements might actually be underestimates. The image of Barron at family events, towering, composed, and dressed with the kind of understated confidence that fashion observers began paying attention to during his White House years, became genuinely iconic in a way that had nothing to do with politics. The fashion angle is worth lingering on, because it reveals something about his character that more formal biographical details miss. During his time at the White House, Barron became quietly known for his preference for sneakers over dress shoes, New Balance 574s, various Adidas and Nike styles, Vans, worn with a kind of easy self-assurance that made the choices look intentional rather than casual. At Thanksgiving events, at casual outings, on the edges of formal family photographs, Barron consistently pulled off the rare trick of looking completely himself within contexts that demanded conformity. It wasn't rebellion. It was simply a person who knew what worked for him and didn't feel the need to apologize for it. But none of this fully addresses the question that has followed Barron into adulthood, the question of what he actually wants, what he actually believes, and what he has actually admitted about his own direction and identity. That question became more urgent in 2024, when Barron's name surfaced in connection with the Republican National Convention. He had been selected to represent Florida as a delegate, a role that carried obvious symbolic weight given his father's position at the center of the Republican Party. Melania Trump subsequently clarified that Barron had declined the position due to prior commitments. That declination was small, logistically speaking. But the conversation it prompted was not. For the first time, people began seriously asking what Barron's own political inclinations actually were. Was he genuinely uninterested in that world? Was he strategically stepping back to preserve future options? Or was he, as some observers speculated, quietly establishing an identity that existed at a careful distance from his father's most polarizing associations? The honest answer is that no one outside his immediate circle knows with certainty. But the pattern of his choices over 18 years tells a story that is at least coherent. A person who has consistently prioritized authentic engagement over performance. A person who attended schools chosen for his actual needs rather than their prestige value. A person who played soccer because he loved soccer, not because it looked good. A person who spoke Slovenian with his grandmother because that relationship mattered, not because it was impressive. The most recent chapter, centering on his time at New York University, has generated fresh waves of speculation. When the fall semester began and Barron's presence on the Greenwich Village campus was conspicuously difficult to confirm, the questions multiplied rapidly. Sources speaking to major publications suggested that Barron may be pursuing his NYU coursework through one of the university's satellite locations, potentially in Washington, D.C., which would keep him close to his parents during a period of significant family activity. That possibility aligns with everything that is known about how his life has been managed and, more importantly, how he himself has operated. Additional reporting has indicated that Barron has been spending substantial time sitting in on business meetings, exploring concepts in the technology sector, and potentially laying early groundwork for a business venture of his own. This last detail, if accurate, is perhaps the most revealing of all. It suggests that at 18, Barron Trump has looked at the landscape in front of him, the political world his father dominates, the business empire that built the family's wealth, the public life that has surrounded him since birth, and is in the process of identifying his own lane within it. Not Donald Trump's lane. Not a reaction against Donald Trump's lane. His own. Melania's own recent activities provide interesting context. Her appearance at a meeting connected to an artificial intelligence education initiative in September 2025 marked one of her most public moves since returning to the White House. Those close to the family suggest that Barron's apparent interest in technology-adjacent business ideas is not coincidental, that mother and son have been, in their characteristically quiet way, thinking through these directions together. So what has Barron Trump finally admitted? Perhaps the most honest answer is that what he has admitted is simply himself. Not through a press conference. Not through a social media account. Not through a carefully managed interview with a sympathetic outlet. But through 18 years of choices that have consistently pointed in the same direction, toward authenticity, away from performance, toward genuine interests, away from inherited roles. He has admitted, through his actions, that he is not simply his father's son in the sense that phrase usually implies. He absorbed the ambition, the physical presence, and the instinct for business. But he also absorbed his mother's discipline, her multilingual inner life, her preference for substance over spectacle. He learned to golf because he loved it. He learned to play soccer because it mattered to him. He declined a political role because he had other things to do. He chose a college environment that gave him flexibility rather than prestige. He has, at every turn, made choices that prioritize what is actually true for him over what the audience expected. At 18, in a family where the audience has always been watching, that is not a small thing. It is, in fact, exactly what most people spend decades trying to figure out how to do. And Barron Trump, the quiet one, the tall one, the one who was never supposed to be the story, appears to have understood it earlier than almost anyone around him. The world has spent years wondering who he really is. It turns out, he has been showing them all along. They just weren't paying attention to the right things.